My father was raised Orthodox Jewish. His family, he was born in the United States, but his family as Orthodox Jews escaped out of Russia in the early part of the 20th century, 1906 or so. And if you were an Orthodox Jew living in anti-Semitic Tsarist Russia in the early years of the 20th century, you had two options. You could fiddle on the roof, or you could try to get out. Now, my family tried to get out. So they hid in a hay wagon that was crossing out of Russia into another country. Tsarist soldiers took their swords and plunged them into the hay just to see if anyone was in there. And by the grace of God, no one was injured. No one said anything. None of the kids, of which there were quite a few in there, sneezed or said, "Are we there yet? I got to go to the bathroom." In Russian, mind you, or Yiddish. But anyway, they got out. And having gotten out of anti-Semitic Tsarist Russia during the pogroms, the terrible times of rape and torture and murder of Jewish people, my family, again, by the grace of God, didn't decide to settle in Poland or Germany or Austria or Central Europe, where many Jews getting out of Russia thought, okay, now we're safe. But of course, they were leaving the frying pan only to go literally into the fire a few years later. For some reason, my family kept moving, got on a ship, got to the United States, and like any good Jewish family, they set up shop in Brooklyn, which is where my father and his brother were raised. Now, years later, my father had a real falling out with his parents. That didn't go well, and then partly it was his fault. He will concede that, but they were difficult also. They weren't dividing over Jesus, they were just dividing over life. So at 18 years old, he decided to leave his family and never return and move to the promised land, La Jolla, California. And he'd had it with his parents, he'd had it with Brooklyn, he'd had it with his synagogue, and he decided, I don't want to spend my time with more Jewish people that at that time he was feeling very frustrated with. He decided to go to California, which felt like Gentileville. And to him, that seemed like a good thing. Like, just, I need a break, I need to get away. So he became an architect, and then he got his first architectural job, and he met a young woman who was a Gentile girl, and he fell in love with her. And he decided he was going to propose. Well, my Jewish grandmother went ballistic. You've got to be kidding me. You're going to marry a shiksa? No, that's not going to happen. And she offered to buy the engagement ring back from him at a profit to him, not to marry the Gentile girl. Now, you have to understand that Jewish grandmothers, they don't pay retail. And they don't want to pay markups to their kids. It just doesn't happen in our culture. But my father did this anyway, and so they got married in 1965, and they had me 2 years later, 1967. But so my mom was an agnostic Methodist. Okay, she'd been brought up in a church. She doesn't ever remember hearing anything about Jesus, or not any clear explanation that Jesus is the way to God and you have to individually receive him to become a follower of his, to be born again. That she didn't inherit these terms, verses like John 1:12 from the Gospel of John. But as many as received him, Jesus, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name. She didn't understand that you could be adopted into God's family. She thought she was a Christian because she went to church. Of course, that's not true, and she didn't realize at the time that going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to McDonald's makes you a hamburger. It's a building. It's not. But God is calling us to a relationship. He wants to adopt us into his family through faith in Jesus. She didn't understand that. She'd been brought up in it, but it didn't connect. My father was now an agnostic Orthodox Jew. You're like, an agnostic Orthodox Jew? What? Well, I mean, that he'd been raised Orthodox, very devout religiously, but he just didn't know what he believed. And this was the 60s. He wasn't the only one who wasn't sure what he believed. So they decided, as we now have a young son, we need to figure out as parents what we're going to instill in this young man in terms of values. So they picked up a Quran. And they bought a Quran, and they started reading the Quran, thought, maybe we'll be Muslims. Maybe that's the way. And they didn't really understand that or agree with it. So they thought, no, let's get a Bhagavad Gita, and maybe we'll become Hindus. So they started to read through that, and they're like, yeah, we don't really understand that either. So they bought a New Testament, and they read the New Testament, and they didn't understand that either. So they would go for walks. How do you know God? Can you know God? Well, how do we, Anyway, eventually, after several years, they went to a little church in my hometown in upstate New York. And there, they heard the pastor wasn't even there that weekend, but some young couples were sharing how to know God personally, how to know Jesus. They explained the good news, what's known as the gospel. And my mother, her heart just quickened, and she realized that as she was hearing John 3:16, that it was true. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus, that whoever believes in him, a Jew like my father or a Gentile like her, whoever believes in him, in Jesus, in his death on the cross, in his resurrection from the dead, in the fact that he's the Messiah who came to bring us life, whoever believes in him shall not perish, go to hell forever and ever, but shall have everlasting life. It just made sense. And people said afterwards, hey, if you want to talk about how to have a relationship with God and get this started in your life, come up afterwards and we'll pray with you. Boom, she was right there, prayed to receive Christ, assuming that my father was right behind her. He wasn't. He was in the lobby having coffee. So she goes out to him and she says, well, how come, this is it. We finally figured this out. How come you're not there? He says, oh, sweetheart, I love you very much, and I'm on my own journey, but I got to tell you, the one thing I learned in the synagogue, in Hebrew school, was that Jesus ain't it. And I don't believe this, but I'm glad for you. Glad for you. So they decided, my mom wanted to go to a Bible study and begin studying the life of Jesus because she was starting from scratch. So some young couples were meeting and they were going to go through the gospel according to Luke. And just week by week, take a chapter, read it, talk about it, Well, my father thought, that's sort of, like learning Shakespeare. As an American, you should read, the Bible, and you should have some familiarity with it. I tried to read it. I didn't understand it, so okay. So all that to say, they started going through it. And he was fascinated with the miracles and the teaching, and it was all fine, but it was all very academic to him. Until it came to a portion in Luke where Jesus asks the men around him, hey, who do people say that I am? And they say, well, some say you're this prophet, you're this, you're that. Okay, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter gives his famous answer, the most famous answer in all of human history. He says to Jesus, to Yeshua, we say in Hebrew, you're the Son of God. You're the Messiah. And rather than saying, whoa, Peter, you're overreaching there. No. Jesus affirms that. And he says, you didn't come to that realization on your own, Peter. My Father in heaven revealed this to you. Well, in my Father's heart, he's like, wait a minute, flag on the play. He doesn't say it out loud because he doesn't want to be embarrassed or create a commotion. But inside, he's like, wait a minute, you've got to be kidding me. You're telling me that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah? Now, he knew enough about Christianity that he believed that Gentiles believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But he thought that they had sort of concocted that. He didn't know that Jesus had claimed it. So my father, being an architect, went home. He didn't say anything, but over the next few weeks, he was processing this. He thought, wait a minute, in my architectural engineering mind, if you claim you're the Messiah, there's only two options. You either are or you are not, right? That's the only two logical options. Now, he thought, okay, well, obviously Jesus isn't the Messiah. So if you say that you're the Messiah and you're not, then there's only two options left. You either think that you're the Messiah and you're just nuts, or you claim to be the Messiah and you know you're not, then you're just a liar. Those are the only two options, logically. You claim to be the Messiah and you're not, so you either know you're not, or you think you are. So my father thought, okay, now I got my bearings. I go back to the Bible study every week, and I just watch to see, well, which one is it? Is he nuts or is he a liar? Well, as he went through the entire thing and saw Jesus die on the cross and say to pray on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. He thinks this guy is thinking lucid. He's clear. He's got so much love even for his enemies. This is not a liar. And there's no evidence he's a lunatic. And if that's not true, then you get back to Jesus is the Messiah. Now there's only two options. If he's the Messiah, then you either have to decide to say, I'm going to follow him, or I'm going to reject him. And that was the decision my father had to make. And when I was 6 years old in 1973, my father came home one day and said, on the bus today, on the way home from work, I prayed to become a follower of Jesus. I don't know if that means being a Christian. I'm still Jewish, but this is true. He's the fulfillment of all the prophecies, and I'm going to follow him. Well, that was a huge revolution in our family. And I got to tell you, in 1973, my father thought he was the first Jewish guy since the Apostle Paul to believe that this was true. Okay? He'd never met a Jewish person who believed that Jesus is the Messiah, and he'd never even heard of one. And in 1973, there weren't that many. In fact, when I was born in 1967, there were only 2,000 Jewish people on the planet who believed that Jesus is the Messiah. 2,000, less than 2,000. Today, there are more than 250,000. I think it's actually probably closer to 300,000. In Israel alone, we've gone from 23 Jewish believers in Jesus in Israel in 1948, when the country was prophetically reborn. Today, there are more than 15,000. As a novelist, I'll only just say that I became a novelist because I really don't know how to do anything else. Okay, I just want to be upfront. I'm a failed political consultant. Everyone I ever worked for lost. Okay, I was in Washington for 24 years. I never made a dent. I was a senior advisor to Steve Forbes on 2 presidential campaigns. He lost them both, and about $70 million of his daughter's inheritance money. So I didn't go so well. I was on an educational reform campaign out to California back in the 90s. It was winning 60-40 when I got there. It lost 70-30. I was hired to be on Prime Minister Netanyahu's comeback campaign team in the year 2000. Now, you'll recall that the Prime Minister was the Prime Minister from 1996 to 1999. Then he lost his re-election in 99. In 2000, in the fall, he began to regather his Israeli advisors, but wanted to add in a small team of American consultants to help him come back to the prime ministership, the premier role. And so there were about 6 of us, and I got hired as a communications aide on that team. It was very exciting. It was a great honor to get to know him and to work with him and with his team. But you may recall that it took him 9 more years to come back. Okay, we were not successful in that round, and I played no role in his actual re-election in 2009. And I don't speak for him now, but I'm close to his team, and I just say that so that you fully understand that I have no political wisdom to offer you. I want to be clear. So I decided to make things up for a living, to write novels. That's really what that is. Because the other thing, aside from being a failed political consultant, I'm also one of the few Jewish people in America that didn't get the financial gene, and that disappointed me. I'm not your stockbroker. I'm not your accountant. I'm not your hedge fund manager. Nor did I get some of the other wonderful Jewish gifts. I'm not your lawyer or your doctor, your chiropractor, your dentist. I didn't get those either. So I was pretty much reduced to just making things up for a living, and it turns out, that worked out okay. And I'm a novelist. Now, my first novel was a story that came out of my time working for the Prime Minister, because I really believed that he was right when he would say, I fear that Americans don't understand that radical Islam is not simply trying to destroy Israel. I believe it's coming and it's going to try to attack and destroy the United States. And he would say this, he would write about it, he would speak about it, and I believed him and I agreed with him. And I decided to write a political thriller, my first. And the first page of that novel, which was called The Last Jihad, puts you inside the cockpit of a jet plane hijacked by radical Islamic terrorists coming in on a kamikaze attack mission into an American city. That was written, I wrote that 9 months before September 11th, 2001. And my plot opened with that kamikaze attack, and it led to an American president launching a war to overthrow Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which I was finishing on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Now, I was late. I can't say that I was thinking that that's exactly how it's going to happen, but I thought it's coming, and what if it happened this way? I was not thinking I was predicting. I was thinking I was going to entertain, but also maybe to use a novel to warn. As it turns out, I was late. My current novel, and I'll just mention that, and then we can open up for any one of these areas, spiritual or geopolitical or my failed partisan life and whatever. But the current novel is called The Third Target. And The Third Target is the first in a new series of political thrillers. It's about a New York Times foreign correspondent who hears a rumor that the Islamic State, aka ISIS or ISIL, that they have captured a cache of chemical weapons in Syria. Now, the reporter can't publish it in the New York Times until he can confirm the story. But he can't confirm the story until he wants to interview the commander of ISIS on the ground in Syria. So he asks his editor, can I go into Syria? And the editor says, absolutely not. More than 200 reporters have been murdered over the last several years of the civil war there. It's too dangerous, you can't go. So he goes anyway. And he takes some colleagues and they go in to Syria. And throughout the course of the novel, my reporter is trying to figure out the answer to two questions. First, does ISIS actually have these genocidal weapons? Is that true? Because the Times and other news organizations have been burned by WMD stories in the Middle East. Okay, we know this. So he wants to be sure. Does ISIS have these chemical weapons? Second, if they do, he wants to know who is going to be attacked. We know in real life that ISIS is trying to bring down the government of Iraq. We know that ISIS is trying to bring down the government of Syria. So the question is, what is the next target? What's the third target? And that's where the title of the book comes from. Is ISIS going to try to activate sleeper cells inside the United States? Are they sneaking people across the border? Do they have chemical weapons now inside America? Is that where the genocidal attack is going to happen? Or are they going to launch this massive genocidal attack inside Israel? Israel is known as the little Satan in radical Islamic theology. The United States is the great Satan. So we're two clear, obvious targets. Which one is going to be attacked? Or are they going into Europe first? Or going to hit one of our moderate Arab allies? These are the questions the reporter is asking, and I'm not going to answer them for you. You're going to have to read the book. But you can get it from the library or whatever, or steal it from somebody. But anyway, I don't recommend that. But just one quick word, and then I'll wrap this up and we'll open up for questions. But to do the research for this, as I have to admit, I had never heard of ISIS when I started writing the book. ISIS barely existed at that time. It's really a morphing of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Okay, Al-Qaeda started, then they opened up a branch office, sort of a Starbucks franchise in Iraq. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI. And over time, the people in AQI thought, well, we don't want to simply take over Iraq, we want Syria too. So they began to unleash a genocidal attack over there and take on Assad. Then they thought, well, we don't want just Syria and Iraq, we want the whole region. And we want Israel, we want Lebanon, we want Jordan, we want Syria, we want Iraq, the whole thing, the Levant. Okay? Then they thought, well, we don't want just this, we want the whole world. And that's why the name has been changing from Al-Qaeda to Al-Qaeda in Iraq to ISIS to the Islamic State. It shows the growing of their ambitions. Now, to do the research for this novel, I started about 2 years ago, and I decided to sit down with two former CIA directors who had become friends over the years. One was Jim Woolsey, who served with President Clinton in the 90s, and the other CIA director was Porter Goss, a Florida resident, who and former congressman and all, who was CIA director under George W. Bush in the 2000s. And so I sat with them, I asked them 1,000 questions, they were very generous with their time. Then I went over to Israel, and I met with the former head of Mossad, Israel's CIA, a guy by the name of Danny Yatom. And as I put this together, I thought, okay, ISIS is my focus, and I'm going to start writing about them, and I began to write the novel. But I thought, I'm missing something. I don't have the perspective of any Sunni Arab Muslim leaders, right? I've got Americans, I got Israelis, and not just those three, but many others. But I need an Arab Muslim Sunni perspective on this ISIS threat. So I went to the Jordanian embassy in Washington, and I just basically cold called them, and I said, could I meet with the ambassador? And they were very gracious, they let me come over. And I said, could I meet with your king? Well, and you would be, and we would know you from... They did not let me meet with the king, but they did invite me to come to Amman, and I spent 4 days. I sat with the prime minister, also later with the foreign minister, with the interior minister, who's responsible for all internal security in Jordan, and with a prince who was a senior advisor to His Majesty, and with several others. And for 4 days, I talked about ISIS and about America and about the threat and Iran and what do you see in Jordan. You've got a moderate king. He's a descendant of Muhammad. He's obviously very devout, but you are on the front lines. How do you see this? And so I try to make these novels as realistic as possible and create a what-if scenario that is plausible. But my editors, my publisher had never heard of ISIS. They kind of were hoping that I would write about a fictional, why don't you just make up a terror group if no one's ever heard of the one you're writing about? But I was doing this because I felt like at some point in the next 4 or 5 years, this threat is coming. And it's going to become much larger, and people will know about it. And if they don't know about it yet, maybe this novel will help raise some attention. As it turns out, the novel was late. By the time I handed it in, the manuscript in the summer of last year, ISIS already had now 45% of Iraq. The president believed and was saying it as I was writing that ISIS was not a threat. They were a JV squad. But we've all learned since that is not the case. So the book is number 4 in the nation right now. It's hit all the major bestselling lists. It's number 4 on the Publishers Weekly list. People are responding to it. They're connecting with it. And that's good because now people, they understand ISIS is a threat over there. The question is, does our government, do our leaders understand how much of a danger it is to us? That if we don't stop them there, they're coming here. We've got to act decisively.